Did you know Elvis Presley's music could get people sued? Have you ever wondered which Elvis songs caused the biggest courtroom dramas? Number 8. A Little Less Conversation, the Junkie, the 40th Remix. Ever heard that catchy Elvis remix that took over the world in 2002? Remember how it appeared in movies, commercials, and sports events everywhere? When Dutch DJ Junkie the 40th, Tom Holkenborg, remixed Elvis Presley's relatively obscure 1968 song, A Little Less Conversation, for a Nike World Cup commercial in 2002, no one expected it would become a global phenomenon. The remixed version shot to pound 1 in over 20 countries, introducing Elvis to a whole new generation. But this worldwide success didn't come without legal complications. The original song was written by Mac Davis and Billy Strange, and the remix created a complex web of royalty rights. Elvis Presley Enterprises, EPE, which manages Elvis's estate, found itself navigating tricky legal waters over how royalties would be distributed between the original songwriters, Junkie the 40th, and the Presley estate. Several music producers claimed they had been approached earlier about remixing the track and sought compensation, arguing they had contributed ideas that were ultimately used in the successful version. One producer filed a lawsuit claiming his preliminary work had been used without credit or compensation when the project was handed to Junkie the 40th. The commercial success also triggered disputes over licensing rights for the remixed version versus the original recording. When the song began, appearing in everything from video games to television shows, questions arose about who had authority to approve these uses and how the revenue should be split. The Presley estate had to carefully balance protecting Elvis's legacy while capitalizing on this unexpected hit. EP faced criticism from some Elvis purists who felt the remix disrespected the original while simultaneously dealing with legal challenges from those wanting a piece of the profitable new recording. What started as a simple commercial soundtrack became one of the most successful and legally complicated posthumous Elvis releases ever. The case highlighted how complex music rights become in the digital age when remixing and repurposing decades-old recordings. Number 7. Hound Dog, the Songwriting Battle. Did you know Hound Dog wasn't written for Elvis? Can you believe the original songwriters had to fight for years to get proper credit? When Elvis recorded Hound Dog in 1956, it became one of his signature songs, but it sparked a legal battle that would last decades. The song was originally written by Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller for blues singer Big Mama Thornton in 1952. When Elvis's version became a massive hit, the publishing rights became a hotly contested issue. Leiber and Stoller found themselves fighting against music industry practices that sometimes diverted songwriting credits and royalties away from original creators. In an era when powerful record producers and executives often demanded a percentage of publishing rights, the duo had to battle to maintain their rightful claim to the song they created. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was notorious for requiring songwriters to give up a portion of their publishing rights if they wanted Elvis to record their songs. This practice, sometimes called copyright grabbing, was common in the 1950s music industry. However, Leiber and Stoller resisted these demands for Hound Dog. The legal tensions increased when various publishers made competing claims to portions of the song's rights. Documentation from the original writing sessions became crucial evidence in establishing who truly deserved compensation from the massive sales of Elvis's recording. The situation grew more complicated when some early pressings of the record incorrectly credited additional writers. Correcting these errors required legal intervention, and Leiber and Stoller spent significant resources protecting their creation. Years later, Leiber and Stoller would become involved in additional legal action when they discovered they weren't receiving proper international royalties for the song. Different countries had varying copyright protection systems, and ensuring proper payment required multiple legal actions across jurisdictions. This case became a landmark example of the struggles songwriters faced in the early rock and roll era. The battle over Hound Dog helped highlight the need for stronger legal protections for music creators and influenced how future music publishing contracts would be structured. Today, music legal experts still study this case as an example of how complicated copyright ownership became in the early days of rock and roll, when record-keeping was less systematic and powerful industry figures often controlled who got credit for hit songs. Number 6. Blue Suede Shoes. The Carl Perkins Controversy. Ever wondered why some people thought Elvis stole blue suede shoes? Did you know two nearly identical versions of the same song were competing on the charts at the same time? When Elvis recorded Blue Suede Shoes in 1956, he created one of music's earliest high-profile cover controversies. The song was written and first recorded by Carl Perkins, who was also signed to Sun Records, just like Elvis. When Perkins was hospitalized after a serious car accident, Elvis's version of the song was released and began climbing the charts. While no direct lawsuit emerged between the artists themselves, the situation created legal tension between various record companies and publishers. Perkins' original version was still active on the charts when Elvis released his cover, creating a rare situation where the same song by different artists competed simultaneously. The publishing rights became especially complicated because Elvis had moved from Sun Records to RCA while Perkins remained at Sun. This meant different companies were promoting different versions of the same song, leading to disputes over promotional territory and royalty distributions. Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, found himself in a difficult position regarding how to protect Perkins' interests while maintaining good relationships with Elvis and RCA. Behind the scenes, legal negotiations determined how radio stations would be approached and how the competing versions would be marketed. Music historians note that this situation led to more explicit contract clauses regarding competing covers for future recordings. Publishers and labels began including specific language about exclusivity periods and competing versions in their contracts after seeing the complications that arose from the Blue Suede Shoes situation. The publicity surrounding the dual releases raised questions about artist ownership of songs and the ethics of covering another artist's material while their version was still new. This controversy influenced how the music industry would handle similar situations for decades to come. Though Elvis publicly gave credit to Perkins as the original artist, tension remained over whether Elvis's celebrity had unfairly overshadowed Perkins' original creation. While Perkins received songwriting royalties from both versions, the situation highlighted inequities in how original artists were sometimes treated compared to more famous performers who covered their work. This case, while not resulting in a traditional courtroom battle, established important precedents for how cover versions would be handled legally and ethically in the emerging rock and roll industry. Its impact continues to influence how artists approach covering songs that are still active hits for their original performers. Number 5. Can't Help Falling in Love. The International Rights Dispute. Did you know Elvis's romantic ballad led to international court battles? Would you believe disputes over this love song are still happening today? Can't Help Falling in Love recorded by Elvis in 1961, for the film Blue Hawaii, became one of his most enduring hits. But behind this beautiful song lies a complex web of international legal disputes that have spanned decades. The melody of the song was based on Plaisir d'amour, an 18th-century French composition by Jean-Paul Aiguide Martini. While that piece was in the public domain, questions arose about how much the new song had transformed the original. Different countries had varying laws about adaptations of public domain works, leading to complex international rights disputes. When the song became a global hit, legal questions emerged about whether proper royalties were being paid in countries with different copyright laws. Elvis's record company and the song's publishers found themselves navigating a patchwork of international regulations that sometimes conflicted with American copyright practices. The songwriters, Luigi Creator, Hugo Peretti, and George David Weiss, faced challenges protecting their rights in countries where local entities claimed partial ownership based on local adaptations or translation. In some territories, unauthorized versions appeared with slightly modified arrangements, leading to legal actions to protect the original. The situation grew more complicated when the song was re-recorded by numerous other artists. Each new version created its own set of licensing agreements and royalty structures. When UB40's version became a worldwide hit in 1993, it triggered a new round of legal examinations about how the original songwriters and Elvis's estate would be compensated. Digital rights became another battlefield as streaming services emerged. Questions about whether existing contracts adequately covered these new formats led to additional legal challenges. The Elvis Presley estate and Sony Music, which controls much of Elvis's catalog, had to assert rights across digital platforms worldwide. Film and television usage created another layer of complexity. When the song appeared in movies like Fools Rush In and was featured prominently in Lilo and Stitch, new licensing agreements had to address international distribution rights, creating opportunities for disputes over proper compensation across different territories. This case demonstrates how even a seemingly simple love song can generate decades of international legal complications. Music law experts still cite Can't Help Falling in Love as an example of how global hits must navigate a complex patchwork of international copyright laws. Number 4. Jailhouse Rock, the film rights battle. Did Elvis lose control of his most iconic movie song? Would you believe one of his greatest performances got caught in a corporate power struggle? Jailhouse Rock, released in 1957, became one of Elvis's signature songs and was featured in the movie of the same name. The recording sparked multiple legal battles, not just over the song itself, but over the entire film and performance rights. MGM Studios, which produced the Jailhouse Rock film, became entangled in disputes with Elvis's management over the rights to use the performance footage in later compilations. The iconic dance sequence, considered one of Elvis's greatest on-screen moments, became particularly contested when retrospectives and documentaries wanted to include it. The songwriters, Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, faced their own legal battles regarding proper credit and royalties. Their publishing company entered into disputes with film studios over synchronization rights, the right to use a song in a film, and how royalties would be calculated when the film aired on television, a relatively new consideration in the 1950s. When home video formats emerged, decades later, new questions arose about whether existing contracts covered these distribution methods. Elvis's estate found itself negotiating with MG, later acquired by other companies, over how the Jailhouse Rock performance could be used in compilation videos and DVD releases. The choreography from the film sequence created another layer of legal complexity. The dance routine, created specifically for the film, raised questions about who owned the rights to the choreography itself. When other artists referenced or paid homage to the iconic dance sequence, questions of intellectual property infringement emerged. Music licensing for digital platforms became yet another battlefield. When streaming services sought to include both the song and film clips, complex negotiations were required to determine appropriate compensation for all rights holders, including Elvis's estate, the songwriters, and the film studio's successors. Documentary filmmakers faced particular challenges when trying to tell Elvis's story. Including the Jailhouse Rock performance often required navigating multiple layers of permissions and fees, sometimes making it prohibitively expensive to include this crucial piece of Elvis history in historical works. The case demonstrates how a single iconic recording can generate decades of legal complications when it exists at the intersection of film, music, and performance rights. Entertainment lawyers still study the Jailhouse Rock rights situation as an example of how complicated multimedia rights management can become over time. Number 3. In the Ghetto, the Mac Davis royalties case. Ever wondered who really profited from Elvis's first socially conscious hit? Did you know the Dogger had to fight for years to get proper payment? When Elvis recorded In the Ghetto in 1969, it marked a departure from his typical material addressing poverty and social issues. Written by Mac Davis. The song became a major hit, but it also led to a complicated legal battle over royalties and proper compensation. Mac Davis, who wrote the song, later claimed he didn't receive proper royalties for his creation. The dispute highlighted the complex relationship between songwriters, publishers, and record companies in the late 1960s music industry. Davis found himself challenging powerful music industry figures to receive fair compensation for a song that had become a worldwide hit. The situation grew more complex because Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, and Elvis's publishing company had specific arrangements regarding songs recorded by Elvis. Songwriters sometimes found themselves accepting less favorable terms to have Elvis record their material, creating potential for later disputes when songs became major hits. International royalty collection created additional complications. Different countries had varying systems for tracking and paying songwriting royalties, and ensuring proper payments across international borders required legal intervention. Davis had to trace money through a complex global network of collection agencies and publishing entities. The case became more complicated when cover versions by other artists emerged. Each new recording created its own royalty stream, but tracking proper payments back to the original NACA required vigilance and sometimes legal action. Davis found himself monitoring numerous versions of his song across different countries. Radio airplay presented its own challenges. In the pre-digital era, tracking when and where songs were played relied on imperfect reporting systems. Davis had to ensure broadcast royalties were being properly collected and distributed, sometimes requiring legal pressure to access complete records of song usage. This case became important in illustrating the power imbalance between individual songwriters and major music corporations. Davis's fight for proper compensation influenced how future songwriters would structure their contracts and helped bring attention to inequities in music publishing practices. The dispute over In the Ghetto remains a significant example of how even hugely successful songs didn't always generate fair returns for their creators. Music business students still Study this case as an example of the challenges songwriters faced in the pre-digital era when trying to ensure proper payment for their intellectual property. Number 2. Suspicious Minds, the producer credit controversy. Did you know Elvis's last Pound 1 hit was surrounded by backstage drama? Can you believe someone's name was removed from one of Elvis's greatest recordings? Suspicious Minds, recorded in 1969, revitalized Elvis's career and became his final pound. One hit on the Billboard charts. Behind this musical triumph was a bitter dispute that ended up in the courts, centering on producer Chips Moman and the famous fade-out, fade-in section of the song. Chips Moman, who produced the American Sound studio sessions that yielded Suspicious Minds, became involved in a heated legal battle when RCA and Elvis's team altered the recording without his approval. Moman had created a distinct fade-out and fade-in arrangement in the song's final minute, which was a creative choice he felt strongly about. When the record was released, Moman discovered his production choice had been altered, and according to some accounts, his producer credit wasn't properly displayed on early pressings of the record. This led to legal action, seeking proper credit and compensation for his work on what would become one of Elvis's most iconic recordings. The dispute highlighted the tension between artistic control and commercial interests. RCA executives reportedly thought the fade-out, fade-in section would hurt the song's commercial potential, while Moman believed it was an artistic element that made the recording distinctive. This clash of creative versus commercial considerations became central to the legal arguments. Songwriter Mark Janes, who penned Suspicious Minds, found himself peripherally involved in the dispute. Questions arose about whether the original demo version James had recorded influenced Moman's production choices, creating another layer of complexity in determining who deserved credit for the song's distinctive sound. The legal battle impacted how Elvis's team approached future recording sessions. The dispute with Moman contributed to Elvis not returning to American Sound Studio for further recordings, despite the success of their collaboration. This change in recording venue would influence the sound of Elvis's later work. The case established important precedents regarding producer rights in the studio. As the role of producers was evolving from technical supervisors to creative contributors, this dispute helped clarify their right to protect their creative decisions and receive proper credit for their work on hit recordings. This situation remains a fascinating example of how behind the scenes, production decisions can lead to major legal disputes even on recordings that achieve massive commercial success. Music producers today benefit from clearer contractual protections, partly because of precedents established through conflicts like the Suspicious Minds controversy. Number 1. Don't Be Cruel and Love Me Tender, the early contract battles. Did you know Elvis didn't own some of his biggest hits? Can you believe the contracts he signed as a young artist would haunt him for decades? When Elvis recorded Don't Be Cruel and Love Me Tender in 1956, he was still a young artist, navigating the complex music business. These early recordings would become the center of one of the most significant legal battles involving Elvis's music, a situation that would affect his career and legacy for decades. The root of the problem lay in the contracts. Elvis signed with Sun Records before moving to RCA Victor. When RCA purchased Elvis's contract from Sun Records San Phillips in 1955 for the then unprecedented sum of $35,000, questions remained about exactly which recordings and rights were included in the deal. This uncertainty would lead to years of legal disputes. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, negotiated deals that sometimes prioritized immediate payment over long-term ownership rights. Industry experts later criticized these arrangements, suggesting Elvis should have retained more control over his early recordings. The legal ramifications of these early contracts would continue long after Elvis's death in 1977. Don't Be Cruel presented particular complications because its joker, Otis Blackwell, had his own disputes with music publishers. Questions about who owned what percentage of the song's publishing rights led to complex legal proceedings that included testimony from various music industry figures about standard practices in the 1950s. Love Me, Tender, adapted from the traditional folk song Ora Lee, created different legal challenges regarding how much of the song was new material versus public domain content. The film of the same name added another layer of complexity regarding synchronization rights and how royalties would be handled when the song appeared in the movie. After Elvis's death, his estate engaged in lengthy legal battles with RCA, later acquired by Sony Music, over royalty rates for his early recordings. These disputes centered on whether contracts signed in the 1950s adequately covered formats and distribution methods that didn't exist when the agreements were created. The legal struggles over these early recordings helped establish important precedents in music law regarding contract interpretation and artist rights. Courts had to determine how to apply decades-old agreements to new technologies and distribution methods not contemplated when the contracts were signed. This case remains significant in illustrating how young artists can sign away valuable rights before understanding their long-term value. Music business courses now regularly use Elvis's early contract situations as cautionary examples of how important it is for new artists to obtain proper legal representation before signing recording and publishing deals. Do you think these legal battles changed how the music industry protects artists today? Will Elvis's music continue to generate new legal questions as technology evolves?